I'll be going through a presentation today. I appreciate everybody joining. Today we're talking about resilient trees. Super excited to get into this discussion. It's something I'm super passionate about and I've worked directly with for the past year or so. So really appreciate you guys coming. And yeah, feel free at the end of the presentation to ask any questions that you have or leave any questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer them at the end of the presentation. Other than that, let's get started. So I'll do a little bit about me, a little bit of background about Temple University, and then we'll kind of hop into the main part of the presentation. So this is this photo of me, but yeah, my name's Owen, as I said before, Owen Lambert. I'm currently a horticulture technician at the Ambler Arboretum and manage over 1,500 new trees and shrubs throughout the campus. And the Ambler Arboretum is kind of like a satellite campus of Temple University. And it's located in Ambler, so not too far by from most of you guys living in the Upper Dublin area. I grew up in Fort Washington and Ambler my entire life, so super familiar with the area. I've been around the whole parks and all my life, and also I did an internship with the Upper Dublin Parks and Recreation in the summer of 2023, where I worked on various park projects with the natural resources manager at the time. So very familiar with the area. So hope I can help you guys if you have any specific questions about this area. So the Ambler Arboretum Temple University started off originally as a Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women, and then was basically an agriculture school base, but quickly transformed into part of Temple University's satellite campuses. So we focus on kind of horticulture and landscape architecture programs at the campus. We also have partnerships with other parts of the school, other departments as well. And basically we have a 187-acre campus that includes botanic gardens, some natural woodlands, student kind of presentations, and as built live viewing that you can come through, as well as historic structures. And we an arboretum, the whole campus itself is an arboretum. So in these photos here, you can see the native fulma garden that we have on the campus. This is our winter garden with some lovely volunteers that kind of come through. So yeah, always feel free to come check out the arboretum, walk around, and if you want to volunteer too, we have volunteer sessions usually on Monday, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. So look for signups for that. But kind of getting into more of this topic specifically. So as an arboretum, we have a collection of hundreds of woody species ranging from small pollinator-friendly shrubs to large canopy trees. And students and volunteers kind of learn from the collections that we have on campus. They can see different species, how they kind of look similar, and how they look different as well. And then specifically, a lot of these new shrubs and tree plantings come after the tornado, which hit the campus, an EF2 level tornado in 2021. And since then, we planted over 1,500 new trees and shrubs throughout the campus. So that's kind of been super amazing to work with by having these new tree plantings. They kind of get right into the climate resiliency of what we're talking about today, because we're seeing new young trees, new young shrubs, and seeing how they're thriving or maybe struggling in the new kind of conditions that we have, whether that's a lot of flooding or drought. You can kind of see which ones are benefiting. So that's where I've gotten a good experience from. But in these photos here, we have a part of our food forest into winter in the Nomo area, which just kind of shows some diversity of the areas that we're working with on the campus. And a big part of that, as I'll get into more, is like pests and diseases. So we have many trees that are kind of climate resilient and may be able to tolerate certain conditions, but many that aren't, and those are due to specific conditions. So kind of like on this photo on the left, this is an example of beech leaf disease, present on American beech, which is a new nematode that's threatening many of our beech trees throughout the eastern part of America. So this was something that would make beech trees not really a great choice, because they're facing this issue, which is making them having struggle to survive. And that's something that with warmer temperatures might become a worse issue. And then on the tree on the right, this is a Shumard's oak. So it's part of the red oak group. And this is, you can see browning on the edge of the leaves, and it's a sign of drought stress. And that also makes these trees not necessarily climate resilient, because they might be struggling with the more present droughts we'll have in this area. And red oak groups, trees in general, are struggling with a variety of diseases like bacterial leaf scorch, oak wilt, but also something like drought stress. So I'll be recommending more of species from the white oak group, but that just shows you some examples of why certain species might be kind of left off of this list that we're trying to present and promote for the future climate. So getting into the topic today on climate resilient trees, I'm going to three different sections, kind of the importance of trees in this area or in general, and then the impacts that climate change is having on our forests and our trees specifically, how the different climate like rising temperatures and a changing precipitation will affect what certain species thrive here and which ones don't. And then I'll be going over a list of climate resilient trees that will hopefully thrive based on research and predictions in this area. So they'll be able to do good in many of the landscapes we have in southeastern PA. So starting off with the importance of trees, as you may know, on September 1st, 2021, an EF2 level tornado ran through Upper Dublin, snapping tops of trees, uprooting trees. Many had to be cut down, unfortunately, and definitely disturbed a lot of the natural spaces around the area. And as you can see, you probably have noticed in the past couple of years, but that's made a huge difference. Even on the Ambler campus, I see, or I'm also a resident where my house got directly affected. We lost a lot of mature trees as well, but you can see differences in just an increase in flooding, increase in higher air temperatures. It's not as comfortable to walk out, comfortable to walk on certain streets because we kind of lost those street trees that provided that canopy. Increased erosion for trees that might have held in the soil along stream banks, and then just less natural spaces for wildlife because we've had to clear a lot of these trees. They've become kind of been converted into lawn spaces. So kind of all these different losses, but it shows you how much like trees are important by like seeing all this loss. You can realize like how important it is that we have them, and how important it is to kind of rebuild these trees in this area. And it's also kind of a great learning opportunity, and you really get to understand their importance, which I think is a great part of it. So to look at the benefits as well. So like I said, trees can solve all these issues, and many of these issues didn't exist with the presence of a large canopy. So trees can solve the problem of increased flooding because they have these large root systems that suck up a lot of water from streets, from going into nearby downspouts, or just any of the sewer system. The trees are able to solve that issue. I know Philadelphia focuses a lot on having street tree plantings, so there's not a overflow of stormwater mixing with sewer water. So it's a very great aspect there. Higher air temperatures. I talk a lot about the urban heat island effect, which is basically the presence of pavements in cities makes air temperatures higher, and even the pavement itself a higher temperature because there's nothing to shade out these pavements that become kind of dangerous to walk on. And that's why trees are so great. There's based on trees fully planted, there's a 22-degree difference between the coolest and hottest air temperatures in Philadelphia, which is just amazing just in one area that it creates that much of a difference. Like I said before, trees can solve the increased issue of takeover by non-native species because by establishing this canopy, they shade out any invasive species from germinating and creating kind of a monoculture. So they kind of promote that biodiversity and promote other native species to kind of exist. Increased erosion can be solved. Like I said, the tree's strong root systems not only support themselves, but also prevent soil from eroding into our inner stream banks and be creating an issue with water quality. And they also provide more spaces for wildlife. Trees directly themselves support a variety of wildlife, whether that's the nuts they produce, the fruit they produce, or just the fact of their standing nature where birds or other mammals can create habitats in these trees. And then these spaces can stay kind of wild. And we don't have many spaces that are kind of just for wildlife. So it's super important to establish the trees to give these important areas for some of our wildlife to exist. And then other ways that trees are so great for us is that you can improve mental health just by the sight of seeing a line of trees, street trees, woodland areas. That's why it's so amazing to take a walk around any parks because of that boost in mental health. Then also reduce respiratory issues they take in many pollutants, especially street trees or urban trees are super great at taking in many pollutants from the air. They act as carbon sinks, which basically means that they're able to capture a lot of carbon dioxide and kind of store that. They live for a long time, so they can store that into the trunks and the living tissue of these trees, which is great for kind of lessening the effect of climate change. And also fruit trees, like food forests, provide fresh local food to low-income communities in urban areas that may not have access to kind of healthy options when it comes to living in the city with few options for grocery stores. So they're super important in that aspect as well. We just installed a food forest at the Ambler Arboretum, which includes fruit trees. So feel free to come check it out at some point. There's many very amazing species that we have, so kind of shows their benefit and shows what trees that you didn't think were edible are actually edible. And then Arbor Day Foundation has a free national tree benefit calculator. So I'll share this presentation, but if you guys want to go to arborday.org and add point/value, you can calculate basically based on a certain species what benefits it will provide, whether that's cost savings in dealing with stormwater, electricity, your property value. So it's a great aspect just to see how a tree can just your landscape in your area. Moving on to the impacts that they're having on our forests of climate change. So in a moderate warming scenario, climate change will lead to an increase of about 3.5 to 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit in this area, or a 5.5 to 9.5 degrees Fahrenheit increase in a high warming scenario. This has also coincided with an increase of 4 inches of rainfall a year. And just because it's raining more doesn't mean that there's not going to be drought conditions prevalent. There'll be large storm surges, but in between these large storm surges will be areas of no precipitation for many weeks, which leads me to my point of many species rely on consistent precipitation in this area, such as salamanders. So that's going to affect their livelihood. And then there's going to be a recruitment and regeneration decline due to seedlings struggling, young trees struggling to establish themselves from this lack of precipitation and increased temperature. So just this hostility towards the young seedlings, and then also presence of deer just makes it hard for them to establish, resulting in change in the distribution of species, and the loss of diversity will occur because certain species will not be able to live in this new climate, which will kind of have other species take over. That kind of leads to only less species kind of existing, more monocultures, which is not great, and the presence of invasive species, of course. And then forest pests and pathogens, insects, diseases, and invasive species will kind of all expand their range northward. A lot of typical pests and diseases that we might deal with in this area are sometimes kind of hampered by the cold winters that we have here. But with an increase of air temperatures and less cool winters, then these species will be able to, these pests, these diseases will still be able to live in these areas and expand their range northward. Ones that weren't able to live in this area will now be able to. So kind of creates their impact in this area, which is obviously not a great thing. So it's hard to combat that. And then also new species will fill in ecological gaps, but this could be a benefit. There's certain southern species that we have that may like this climate more, may fit better into this area. So having them take over might not be a bad thing, but there's also, once again, certain invasive species that also may like this area. So it's picking your battles and seeing which species you can kind of incorporate and which ones you have to kind of work around with. And like I did forget to mention, but this southeastern PA's climate will be somewhat similar to South Carolina in the future, depending on if it's a moderate or high warming scenario. So that's the impacts of climate change on our forests. But what I'll get into now is the climate resilient trees that we have. So these are the trees that in your landscapes, whether that's your home, that's your property, local parks, these are trees that we want to push for and promote. These are the trees that will hopefully have a lot of success in this area based on a lot of research that was conducted. These trees will hopefully be the new ones of the future, which is great. Like I said, we planted many new trees at the Ambler Arboretum, so we're able to see which ones are doing well and which ones aren't, and kind of for ourselves figuring out which are climate resilient trees. And I took a lot of these trees from Mount Cuba. They used the U.S. Forest Service Tree Atlas and Botanic Garden Conservation Assessment Tool. They looked at which of these trees seem to do the best in this specific climate that we'll have. They organized these trees into different categories based on their climate resiliency, but then also if they have any major pests and diseases, like I said before, with the beech trees or trees in the red oak groups, kind of leaving those out because they're not as much climate resilient because of this threat of pests and diseases. So we'll be focusing on the ones they wish to promote. So there's other categories, of course, but these are the ones that they think will have the best success in this area. And so these trees are generally tolerant of drought, pollution, flooding, and a high wind. All these will increase with climate change. So these are the best trees to have. Some of these species you may be familiar with that are kind of already native to this area, but some are more southern species that we're wishing to promote because of this increase in temperatures and climate similar to South Carolina. A lot of these trees are from the south, so it's kind of a new look at some species that may have a lot of success here. So I'll be going through a bunch of trees canopy trees and understory trees, and ones that I think you should plant and promote in your landscapes that you have. So we'll be looking at a bunch of different parts of these trees. So I'll be going through preferable growing conditions, their wildlife relationships, habitat, and then what makes them climate resiliency, and their special interests, and then kind of just my personal experience with these trees and how I see them do. So starting off, we have red maples. I'm sure many of you might be familiar with red maples. Staple of making maple syrup, but also staple of this general area. They're very much a keystone species. They're an important species in certain forest types that we have around the eastern temperate forest that we're kind of located within. I've seen them have a lot of success. They grow incredibly fast. They have this beautiful red fall color, and they're tolerable of just many light and soil conditions. So if you're working with poor soil or kind of in a somewhat shaded area still, they're still able to thrive and still kind of grow rapidly in that area and establish themselves, which is great. So as a keystone species, they're super important to wildlife. Many insects and caterpillars can be found on them. The fruits are eaten by gray squirrels and many other species. They have those winged samaras that you see fly in early spring / summer, which is always I loved growing up seeing those winged seeds. So that's what those come from, any maple tree, but also red maples as well. And then their climate resiliency, like I said before, tolerant of many different soil conditions, but drought as well. And they're kind of like I said before, certain species take in ecological gaps, and because we have a lack of fire maintained ecosystems in this area, red maple is able to thrive more than other species, let's say, that are in like the pine group, for example. So we're kind of seeing a shift in certain conditions, but for these, you want to plant them to medium to wet spots, well-drained soil, full sun, and they prefer slightly acidic soils, but like I said, tolerant of a wide range of soils. Many of these species like well-drained sun and full sun, just as canopy trees, and some of the understory trees as well, still prefer that full sun, but can tolerate a little bit of part shade. So moving on, we have carrias. So these are hickories, grow also kind of like a keystone species, super important trees in many different forest ecosystems. They can grow quite tall, but they're not usually too wide. They kind of have a little bit of a wild form, a little bit of a messy form, but they provide these amazing nuts that are edible for us as humans, but also are edible to many wildlife. And they're an important host plant, that provides habitat for many different species. You can find them in dry upland slopes to moist bottomland, so a variety of conditions, tolerant of drought and extreme temperatures. And then special interests, I'd say, are the yellow follow color, like I said, the edible nuts, the fact that they're keystone species, and they're great shade tree. A lot of these trees, especially the canopy trees, provide great shade to your landscape. So definitely recommend this one if you're looking for those specific interests. They also have these cool pinnately compound leaves, which you can see on the right of the screen right now. With pinnately compound leaf basically just means it's a leaf that has smaller leaflets. So like in this photo on the right, you can see this carrier has about 5 to 7 leaflets, but it kind of makes up one general leaf. So that's kind of one thing that sets apart from those species. Specific species I mentioned down here, these are species that are recommended by Mount Cuba. So Carya is a wide genus. Many of these genuses are wide ranging, but these are specific ones that they're kind of recommending. At the end, I'll provide a list that includes all the species that we talked about, as well as other ones that you guys can kind of research and look into that are all kind of recommended for the future climate here. Moving on to Celtis, these are hackberries. So not as tall species, but tolerant, once again, of very wet soils, but also dry soils. They kind of have that mix. That's what makes them great for a rain garden, because rain gardens, they become flooded, but they also don't have much soil moisture for most of the time. So being able to tolerate both of those things at the same time makes them great species for climate resiliency, but also just for rain gardens as well, specifically. But they're also tolerant of many urban pollutants. So sometimes you might see them in an urban setting. What I think makes them super special is their bark specifically. I think I can spot a hackberry from a mile away because they have these very quirky ridges that you can see on the photo on the right. They're also a great shade tree. They have a very dense foliage. Also, special interest is the fleshy parts of the fruits are edible that you can see in the top right. Many birds consume these specific fruits, but this wildlife relationships wise, hackberries also supports hackberry emperor and question mark butterfly. There's many specific butterflies or insects that are only able to kind of are host to only specific species, and so that's what makes trees also very essential, is that they're host to specific host to specific species, which is super essential, but they also provide habitat to so many more, which I think makes them just super important. So like I said, also yellow fall color is another key interest here. With preferable growing conditions, like I said before, most of these are well-drained soil, full sun, but this tolerates a wide range of soil conditions. But they like a little bit more than moist and organically rich soil than maybe a red maple, where you want to establish kind of some organic matter, some mulch. For any of these species, you want to establish some mulch, but some lean toward having more of a leaf litter. Other examples of kind of like a forest setting that kind of creates a soil moisture that's heavy in organic matter is really essential for some of these species. Moving on, we have the pines. Pines are great evergreen. So that's one example. These are the only evergreens I'll be talking about. There's many more for you guys to research, but pines are so great because they provide foliage year round. Pines are known for producing pine cones. So that's great if you have specific interest in that. Pine cones are also great. They provide these seeds and food for so much different wildlife. Very long living, excellent carbon sinks. So they suck up a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Also good windbreaks. They're good for screenings. If you want to have a screening on your property, pines are a great example for that. They grow often, usually a little bit slower than some of these species, but they can quickly establish themselves. And here's a specific species that I was recommending in this bottom section. And they prefer slightly acidic soil. So for some of these soil types, most of these trees are tolerant a little bit of a wide range, but for some that want a more acidic soil, it's always great to have a soil test of where you may be planting a specific species like a pine, just to ensure that they'll have success here. A lot of these trees, you just place them in the right spot and give enough proper care to them in the first couple of years, they'll quickly establish themselves and should have success. And so yeah, tolerant, preferable growing conditions, dry to medium moisture areas. So not as much of a wet species to worry about. So that's what makes them so great for climate resiliency, because they're tolerant to this drought. Moving on, this is the American sycamore, very large tree, medium to wet spots, well-drained soil. They prefer these, like I said before, a soil that's high in organic matter and kind of moist in general. I love them because they have this beautiful peeling white bark. So on the base, it's kind of like a brownish to blackish bark. But then as they go up the trunk, they start to peel back those layers and you kind of see a striking white bark, as you can see on the photo on the right. That's what makes this tree super interesting. They're very large and they also have very large leaves. So definitely need to have proper space for them. They also can be very messy. They drop a lot of these specific seed balls as well as branches. They also form is a little bit messy. So a little more difficult species sometimes to work around with, but I think a great tree, a great canopy tree as well. They're climate resilient because they tolerate drought. But they also tolerate a lot of flooding because they're a little bit okay with having kind of wet feet or wet roots. And they also tolerate urban pollution. So you guys may see, if you're in the city, you may see, like if you're in Philadelphia, you'll see these as well as London plains, which are very similar looking species, but they're both very tolerant of urban pollution. So having that added benefit is so great, especially even in an area like Upper Dublin, where we still have a lot of pollutants, still kind of in a semi-dense developed area. So having that added benefit is always great. So yeah, special interests, like I said, are the peeling white bark, the huge leaves. They grow very fast, and they have these beautiful fruiting balls that hang from the branches, which kind of makes them winter interest, as you can see on the photo on the right, where all the leaves have fallen off, but the seed balls are still hanging on. Moving on to oaks. So oaks are very much a keystone species. They are super important for wildlife, so that's something that you want. Then these are a great selection. Like I said before, with pests and diseases, I would definitely recommend oaks from the white oak group. So some of the species mentioned down there are from the white oak group, but some are also from the red oak group. So there's a little bit of a mix, but generally species in the white oak group, I would recommend, even just as you can see Quercus alba, that is a species that is white oak. So that is in the white oak group. And that's a great example of an oak tree to kind of establish. But yeah, so they're great for wildlife, but they're also a great shade tree. They get very large, very wide. They can reduce runoff because they have these strong root systems, live very long. And then the fall color, and the leaves in general is very interesting because they have this yellow to red fall color, but some of them, a lot of oak species retain their leaves during the winter. So a lot of them will get brown and crispy, but it will add some interest, add some variety to your landscape. So it kind of sets them apart from many other species, which I think is very, very interesting. For preferable growing conditions, medium to wet spots, like I said again, well-drained soil, full sun, and they like having a nice established of like organic matter mulch around them. So any of those conditions will work well for oaks. Moving on to our understory trees. So these are trees that are generally smaller, and they still can be kind of mature trees, but they are generally smaller and generally fit better on in landscapes that are working with smaller space, I would say. So starting off, we have the catalpa. So I have two species here, Catalpa bignoides and Catalpa speciosa. These are great trees. They're very messy, so that's one thing to kind of consider. But they're a great climate resilient tree because they're very aggressive and they have rapid growth. So they're just tolerant of a wide range amount of soils. Like I've seen Catalpa growing in barely any soil anywhere in the Philadelphia, let's say, for example, or in this general area. They're growing in super rough conditions and they still are managed to thrive. So I think that makes them super resilient, super amazing species that's going to have success in this area. When it comes to special interests, they have these large sweet white flowers that a lot of butterflies and bees like to kind of visit. Then they also provide shelter to songbirds and squirrels. They have the Catalpa sphinx caterpillar. Like I said, you have those unique caterpillars and other insects that kind of only are host to certain species. So it's nice having that added benefit. Then they're incredibly tolerant of just a wide range of conditions, and they have these large long pods that hang off branches, so that kind of adds some interest throughout the season that you might want to consider. Medium to wet areas for these species, and then wet and dry soil. So like I said, kind of similar to species I mentioned before, where they're good for rain gardens because they're like able to tolerate standing water, but then drier soils as well. So great species, Catalpa. Moving on, this is a Simina triloba, or the pawpaw. This is part of a tropical plant family. So pawpaw is a little bit different. It's the most northward plant of that tropical family, and it's very tropical-like in every way, in its form, in its leaves, and in the fruit that it produces. Who wouldn't want tropical fruits that taste like a banana, mango, and pineapple? They're super sweet. They ripen kind of in the fall, kind of this time, September to October, November, kind of that area is when they're best for harvesting. But I think they're super cool. They're relatively not too tall or wide. They kind of create this pyramidal form. So if you have a small area you're working with, or you kind of want to make a hedge, for example, these are just a great inclusion. You can get these very tasty fruits off of them. Like I said, in this time of the year, they like medium to wet spots, well-drained soils. Like I said, full sun apart shade because they're more of an understory, so they're able to tolerate some shade. And then they prefer these moist, acidic, and fertile soils. So another thing, they are tolerate of generally a wide range of different soils, but I would just double check, make sure that I would do a soil test, make sure it's a little bit acidic, make sure that these will thrive here. For any of these trees, a lot of times it's good just have a soil test, but specifically ones that may need more of an acidic soil, it's always great. But they have many different relationships with wildlife. They're pollinated by flies and beetles. They have these cool red flowers that come out in the springtime. And then the fleshy fruit are eaten by many different types of wildlife, not just us as humans. So they're super tasty to many wildlife, but they're from low bottom woods, wooded slopes. They're more of a southern species. So they have some range up in Pennsylvania, but they have a wider range in Virginia and some of the southern states. So that's what makes them super climate resilient, tolerant of these extreme temperatures, and also wide genetic diversity, which is super important for a lot of these trees because if any passing disease were to come along and they didn't have that wide genetic diversity, easily could be wiped out. But because of pawpaw's very large range, it kind of makes them have that stronger genetic diversity. So I definitely I recommend these for hedges or the fruits themselves. And then the leaves, even the leaves are very tropical looking. So they're kind of some unique interest. Also, beautiful yellow fall color at this time of year. Moving on, this is Salix nigra, or black willow. So about 30 to 60 feet tall, 30 to 60 feet wide. So this is a very wet tolerant species. They're from floodplains, stream, riverbanks, swamps, marshes and ponds. So all those types of areas, they seed in readily, and they can be very aggressive. They're very easily at establishing themselves, but I'm sure you guys have heard of willows before. There's the weeping willow, which is a common one that's planted. We have some on Ambler arboretum, but there's also the black willow, which is kind of our native equivalent to the weeping willow. There's also many other types of willow species, but super big fan of this one just because I think the leaf texture and leaves are very unique to these species. They have these very thin leaves that kind of blow in the wind and kind of create that nice feeling, kind of nice sound as you kind of walk by them, especially if you're in kind of more of a riparian area with like a river or any of those examples. But they're a great habitat provider for many of these wetland species of insects and mammals. Butterflies and bees are attracted to the flowers in this kind of springtime, and then deers and rabbits eat the leaves. So they're great wildlife because they're great for wildlife because they're kind of unique in the specific animals they may target because they come from this more riparian or wet areas. And then what makes them climate resilient? They tolerate flooding. They're very aggressive, grow incredibly fast. We had I worked when I was working for Upper Dublin Parks and Recreation. One of the areas, I think it was like the Tannery Run area, we had done a large tree installation, a bunch of different tree plugs and tree tubes. And many of these trees were barely making it through the tree tubes, I think after year 1 and year 2. But these black willows had already burst open these tree tubes already after year 1 and year 2, and they were already like leaning over and needed to be staked up. So grow incredibly fast. Also have the strong ability to regenerate, which makes them great for having disturbances like tornadoes or other examples. They're still able to regenerate after having such a disturbance. And they also act as a carbon sink. Like I said before, they grow so incredibly fast that they're able to suck in a lot of carbon dioxide from the air and kind of store that in their biomass, which makes them great for helping to fight against climate change. Special interest, they're great for erosion control. So a lot of times you'll see live staking with black willows, which basically is just taking cuttings and branches and sticking them in like ground in a riparian area, and it helps to establish new black willows, which will provide strong roots and hold in that soil. Also have these deep grooves and rough textured bark, which makes them kind of unique looking, especially in the winter time. And they help to improve water quality by being this wetland species that kind of takes in all this water. They are a little bit messy, so it's something that you want to consider. Not your typical landscape tree, but also they add a unique texture, I would say, to your landscape. So definitely highly recommend the black willow. Moving on, talking about black gum. So there's some specific species down here. Nyssa sylvatica is the common one that's native to this area, and you'll see a lot of times in landscapes, but there's also some southern species that Mount Cuba is also recommending. When it comes to fall color, black gum is definitely one of my favorites. I think maples are a beautiful fall color, but especially black gum. As you can see in the photo on bottom left, they have these red, orange, purplish fall color that I go to at Fort Washington State Park. They have a lot of these black gums, and I always love to see them. So when it comes to fall interest, super amazing what black gum provides. They also provide this unique horizontal branching, which, as you can see in the photo on the top left, it has this like triangular form, pyramidal form. So that kind of makes them also a unique species in the landscape with having these horizontal branches that come off kind of the main stem. What makes them climate resilient is they tolerate flooding, drought, and high temperatures. They're also great in rain gardens. Like I said, they're good with having wet feet, having wet roots, but then also dealing with dry soil conditions for a very long time. They're from low wet woods and bottomlands, so this kind of makes them tolerate to those conditions. But they're an excellent source for bees, birds, and wildlife when it comes to nectar. And then they produce these bluish, blackish drupes. You can see in the top left photo, that's kind of the early stage of these drupes being produced. But wildlife definitely seeks these out, especially fall bird migration. These are one of the last food sources that these birds are able to access on their migration. So that's why they're such an important species for wildlife. I would say for growing these medium to wet moisture areas, they prefer these moist and slightly acidic soils and semi-well draining soils. Most of these trees would like well draining soils, but black gum is able to tolerate that wet feet, like I said before, so it's not as much of an issue. They get sort of tall, but they usually stay relatively shorter, and they don't get too wide, about 20 to 30 feet wide in general. Moving on to dogwoods. So dogwoods, recommending 2 species down here, Cornus florida and Cornus foemina. Dogwoods are definitely a highly prized landscape tree. they're known as one of the most beautiful flowering trees in this area. And I'm recommending a couple native species. So what they're prized for, of course, is those beautiful white flowers that come out in the springtime. That many specialized bees visit these flowers. So and butterflies, like I said, certain trees host to certain insects and other species, but these host a lot of specialized bees and not specific bees that you'll see all the time, but very specialized ones, as well as their host plant for spring is their butterflies. So they have that kind of unique quality, unique trait to provide a different source for wildlife. They have these bright red fruits that are loved by birds that you'll see kind of in the late summer, fall time, which kind of provides that late fall interest. They also have this bright red fall color at the same time, so kind of doubles on top of each other. Most typically a flatter top form. They're usually great for landscapes because they have a very strong stance, a very nice looking form in this area. So I'd say they're great for their own standalone landscape trees. What makes them climate resilient is they're also kind of more of a silent species, intolerant of this extreme temperatures. When growing these, you want to think about medium moisture areas. So it doesn't have to be too much of a wet feed or a dry spot, but kind of in the middle, full sun and part shade. And then they like these rich organic matter and acidic soils, as well as well-drained soils. Once again, not super tall or wide trees, but have that really good form. Moving on to, this is Chionanthus virginicus, or the fringe tree. So this is probably the smallest species we talked about, only getting to 12 to 20 feet tall, 12 to 20 feet wide. They like medium moisture areas, well-drained soil, and full sun and part shade. What makes them really interesting is they have this beautiful yellow fall color, but they also have these fragrant white flowers that are very unique looking, very thin, but they come out so in spring, summertime, that are very nice looking, multi-stemmed. Sometimes they could be kind of trained into a single stem tree, but also have that kind of variety that makes them a little bit shrub-like to becoming an understory tree. The bark is also have the scaly dark brown ridges and a little bit of a red tinge. They also have these hanging blue-black drupes, which kind of add some interest, like I said, similar to the black gum in that kind of late summer, fall time. They come from rich, moist woods and hillsides. This is also more of a southern species, like I said before, so kind of incorporating that to our landscapes today. Tolerant air pollution, so they're good for kind of like more urban areas, more developed areas. Those fruits are great for birds and wildlife, kind of just like the black gum as well. And the flowers attract many pollinators. So if you're looking for a smaller tree in a space that you're working with, definitely recommend the fringe tree. And the last tree we'll be talking about today is the American yellowwood. So these are about 30, 50 feet tall, 40 to 55 feet wide. So a large understory tree. Average moisture areas, well-drained soils, full sun, and they help to protect from strong wind. It's important to maybe have these in an area that's not where they're just standalones, where they're being damaged by high winds. They need a little bit of protection, and they also slightly tolerate drought soil. So they're not a full wide range of soil conditions, but are able to tolerate a slightly dry soil. So definitely look for average moisture areas to a little bit of a wetter moisture area on your landscape. They provide great nesting sites for songbirds, and kind of like the fringe tree, great pollen for bees and other pollinators. Same thing, they have these white flowers that are fragrant, just like the fringe tree, but kind of in a larger sense. So I think they have that great addition when it comes to the human aspect. They have these hanging white flowers that are fragrant, great shade tree. And like I said before, with the carias, they have these large pinnately compound leaves that are kind of have these rounded margins, rounded edges, which makes them very unique looking, very soft texture wise. And also they have these very smooth gray to brownish bark, which kind of adds some more interest in the winter time when all the leaves have fallen off. They also have this yellow fall color, and kind of similar to the catalpa, they have these hanging pea pods in the fall. So kind of adding interest year round to these species. So definitely recommend the American yellowwood, very good landscape tree to establish. So that is all the trees that I discussed when it comes to climate resiliency. Those are the ones I have a lot of experience with, and ones I definitely highly recommend from working with them. But there's many other trees I'll show in a future slide that are recommended by Mount Cuba. Real quick, I have a map, this slide, which is a map of the Ambler Arboretum. So every tree that we have just discussed is on this map, except for the Black Willow, which is on the other side of Meeting House Road. It's still a part of Ambler Arboretum's campus, but it's not a part of this current map right here. But so yeah, feel free to use this map and use the Arboretum Explorer. So the Arboretum Explorer, I'll go more into that on the next slide, but basically you can search for any of these trees and it'll give you locations on where these trees are on the campus. But for reference, I've listed each species here, where you can take yourself on a self-guided tour, see these trees in the landscape, see the differences, and see if you would like to like to plant these in your landscapes for the future. It's a late fall currently, so not all of these are fully in leaf, but you're still able to see kind of what makes them so unique and so great for our landscapes. So yeah, like I said, if you want to use the arboretumexplorer.org, feel free to use that resource for you. You can look up any species name in this and for Temple University's Ambler Arboretum, and it'll give you locations on where these species are. I also hope to be putting in a map, kind of a tour, a self-guided tour of these specific trees onto Arboretum Explorer. But for now, if you just want to use the map itself, you can also just research the certain species and you should find out all of its locations. It'll give you the precise locations for all these trees when you're touring the campus. So like I said, I'll provide the slides for you guys, but this is a list of all the trees we discussed, as well as additional ones to use in your landscape. So all the trees we just mentioned are on this list, and Mount Cuba has provided many other trees that they recommended for trees to plant and promote for the future. So feel free to research any of these species as well and see how they might fit in your landscapes. Any questions? Thank you guys for going through that all with me. I hope you guys learned a lot and have some ideas of trees you may want to use.
Thank you, Owen. Appreciate it. Oh,
yeah.
Janet has her hand raised. Let me unmute her.
Hi. When you say that a tree is fast growing, are we talking like it's going to grow 6 inches a year? It's going to grow a foot a year? Can you clarify?
Yeah, I can clarify. Yeah, fast growing species, kind of like the black willow, I would say would grow a couple feet a year. Depends on kind of what part of their life stage they're at. But yeah, typical species like red maple, black willow, I think will grow anywhere from about 1 to 5 feet a year. So that's kind of like what I mean when it comes to fast growing species. Other ones kind of like the pine trees are a little bit slow growing, so they take more of their time to establish. But if you're looking for something that has kind of an instant impact, I would definitely recommend any of those species that are fast growing. Thank you for the question too.
All right, any others? You can raise your hand or pop them in the chat. All right. Well, thank you, Owen. That was great.
Sorry, can I ask one more?
Yeah.
So for the the trees that you called understory trees, if I have a spot in my yard where it is 100% sun all year long, I probably should avoid understory trees. Like there is no other like shade trees around.
You can definitely use any of the understory trees. I recommend it. You can still use in full sun. I'd say most of these would still love full sun. I just kind of target them as understory trees because of their relatively smaller size. But I would say most of these still will be completely tolerant of full sun. So if you're looking for those areas, then they should be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and put in the chat about the speed of growth.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. I would say when it comes to deer rutting, yeah, like no specific species are kind of resistant to deer rutting, but if you're looking for trees, like if you're dealing with caging or buck rubbing, like there's buck rubbing protections where kind of like a plastic mesh to put around the trees. I would definitely recommend purchasing a tree that's already at a certain size, or a fast growing tree like a red maple where you can quickly kind of just place any buck rub protection around the base of the tree rather than dealing with a smaller tree that might deal with kind of herbivory. Deer usually have a browse line of about 4 feet. So if you can have a tree that's already kind of a large enough size, that's over that browse line, you shouldn't have to worry about deer issues other than protecting the bark or the base, kind of with using a plastic mesh to block any buck rubbing that would be done. For the question of if we plant new trees in the fall, I would recommend planting new trees in the spring and fall. I recommend planting new trees in the fall just because, especially with the high temperatures that we're having or the droughts, the fall, if you're planting in the fall, trees will go dormant quickly after, so they're not immediately having to use their resources and try to compete as the spring and summer picks up with these higher temperatures. So definitely recommend the fall, but spring is also an okay time to plant. You just want to make sure that you're giving your tree adequate water when you're planting in the spring. In the fall time, still watering your tree in, of course, is important, but as the trees start to senesce and fall off, then you can kind of stop irrigation. So I recommend the fall, but spring also works. When it comes to planting, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a temperature cutoff, but the idea is to have, I would say once the temperatures are reaching in the 40 degrees on the day average daily temperatures, that's a good time to plant, whether that's the spring or the fall. You want to make sure just the ground isn't frozen. I definitely recommend the fall time. Planting would be great in kind of anywhere from early October to early mid-November is the best time to plant the fall. Definitely October is a good month, but the first couple of weeks of November where the average daily temperatures are still a little bit higher in the 40s, still would recommend.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Owen. That was a lot of great information.
Yeah. Thanks for
really appreciate you hopping on here.
Yeah, of course.
Great. And our next talk, just want to throw this out here, is Thursday, December 4th. So you can get signed up for that to receive the Zoom link. Great. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you, guys.